Hello, everyone, and welcome to Abbey Road Studios for a Rest is History Beatles special. Now, I am afraid that Dominic isn't here because, as regular listeners will know, he disgraces himself by not liking John Lennon and also being fed up with talking about the Beatles. And we were recently, the pair of us, on Conan O'Brien's podcast. And Conan asked us, were we Beatles or Stones? I, of course, said Beatles. Dominic said Stones. And then said, I am never going to talk about the Beatles again. So when I got the opportunity to do a Beatles podcast here in Abbey Road, I thought, well, who can I get to replace Dominic? Who can be Denny Lane to my Paul McCartney? And so I thought, well, Conan O'Brien. And Conan, here you are.
Lucky
in Abbey
me.
Road.
I just flew 35,000 miles to be called Denny Lane to your Paul McCartney. And I accept it. It's a high honor.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Very happy
because
to be here.
When we met in LA, you were talking about how you two are a massive Beatles fan. But more than that, you talked about how you've actually met George and Paul and Ringo.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to meet 3 of the 4 Beatles. John died when I was in high school. But I was a Beatles fan in the 70s to the exclusion of music that was coming out at the time. I was stubbornly just listening to Beatles records throughout the 70s. But later on, once I had a TV show and became known, I was lucky to meet 3 of them, which was really special. I met George when I was a writer at Saturday Night Live, and he was meeting with Lorne Michaels, who's a producer. They had gone out for drinks, and then there's a writer's room at Saturday Night Live, and George came in. I'll never forget. He apologized initially because he had been drinking some quantity of liquor. So he said, "I'm sorry, I'm pissed as a newt." And he was kind of bobbing from shoe to shoe. He asked why we were all staring at him. Me being a Beatles geek, I had in my office the same make, model, year Country Gentleman that George played in the 64 tour. And I thought about going and getting it and showing it to him, but I thought, no, he's not in a condition to appreciate that. So he'll probably hit me with it. And then George sat down at a piano and started to play, which was lovely.
And what was he playing?
He was just playing around chords. He wasn't playing a song. Yeah,
right.
he was.
So not My Guitar Gently Weeps. Or
No, it wasn't what you think. And Hollywood would make it a full rendition of While My Guitar Gently Weeps. It was not.
Still, you were listening to a Beatle play the piano.
I was listening to a Beatle play the piano, and I've also been lucky enough to be in a room where Paul was playing guitar, and it was just a guitar that was in the room, so he's left-handed. He was just playing it upside down and backwards. And I said, "How do you do that? Where did you learn to do that?" And he said to me, back in the day, when we were starting out, I had to, because the only other way to play it would be to retune John's guitar, and he would have crippled me.
I can't believe that you've you've had these experiences. Because the closest that I have come to meeting a Beatle was via my wife Sadie, who when she was 3 was in a queue with her parents for a visa to America. Yeah. And Paul was standing behind her and picked her up.
I was in that queue as well. So I've got you beat at every turn.
Oh, God. Yeah. So, you're a huge Beatles fan.
Yeah.
As am I. But there are, of course, skeptics out there, Dominic being one of them.
Yes.
So I guess the question, we're a history podcast rather than a music podcast. Mm-hmm. So we need to make the case that the Beatles are historically significant.
Yes.
Is that a case you think that can be made?
Easily. The Beatles are a complete break with what happened before. They are singer-songwriters. They wrote their own music. There are so many ways that they depart. So many groups at the time, there's the lead and then there's the rest of the group. It's, Dion and the Belmonts. There was a lot of pressure for them to have a leader. I think briefly they were Johnny and the Moondogs, very briefly, but they always knew, no, we're a group.
So it's kind of synergy of it.
Yeah, and that was unusual at the time. So they're a break with pretty much everything that comes before them, and they're as relevant today as they were in 1964.
Because obviously there have been acts that have been massive in their own time and then slightly have started to fade.
Yeah.
But I guess you could say that the Beatles have endured long enough and remain massive enough that you can say that people will probably be listening to them in decades' times, maybe in centuries' time.
Yeah. There's a great clip, I think it's in the Anthology, where they're talking to a young guy, basically a teenager, a kid, at Shea Stadium, and they're trying to the interviewer's trying to run them down a little bit.
Yeah,
and this kid says,
I love them.
Yeah, and he just says they're incredible musicians, and he more or less makes the case there in 1965 or 6 that we're going to be listening to their music forever.
They are, I think, the best-selling musical act of all time. I mean, every statistic that they generate is off the scale. I guess the case I would make, and why I think they're historically significant, is because in a way they are lightning rods for so much that makes the 60s a revolutionary decade. Yeah. And I think that in all kinds of ways in the 21st century, we're living in the aftermath of what happened in the 60s.
Right.
Rather like people in the 16th century were living in the aftermath of what had happened in the 1520s. I think the transformation, the cultural, the ethical transformation is on that scale.
Yes.
And the Beatles are both kind of symbols of it, but they're also vectors of it.
Yeah. I mean, the Beatles themselves knew that they weren't creating all this change. Sometimes they were just the avatar that could represent the change. And I think they were pretty sane. I mean, another group with that kind of fame would have said, we did all this. We changed humankind forever. Yeah. They knew that, of course, that wasn't the case, but they were the perfect representation of what was happening. And they did drive and give credence to a lot of amazing changes that were happening.
And I think also, I mean, just to begin, they do have their roots in kind of quite the decades before they were born, so which would include the war years, but going back into the 30s and even back into the 20s. Mm-hmm. So John was a big fan of Just William. I don't know if that's a thing in America, probably not, but it's kind of stories of this kind of raggedy schoolboy, and he has a gang of outlaws, and John was obsessed by it. And Paul's dad, he kind of played all kinds of old traditional English music.
Yes.
And the influence of that on the Beatles tracks is kind of really evident. And also, I think it's interesting that they meet, John and Paul meet at a church fete. Neither of them were in any way religious, but it's a reminder that the world of England in the 50s is still one where, you want to be a skiffle band, you still have to go and do it at a church fete because there isn't really anywhere else to have that kind of fun.
That's the only gig.
That's the only gig in town, really. Yeah.
So no, they come from a friend of mine said once, Jimmy Vivino, my band leader, said the Beatles single-handedly brought us from black and white to color, which I thought was an interesting way to look at it. Which is they come from this very old tradition.
Yeah.
And they're well schooled in English music hall, big band.
Swing and all that.
They have big ears. They're listening and hearing everything and soaking it all up. And later on, it all comes out in the music.
But obviously, one of the things that they are listening to and are able to listen to, perhaps in a way that lots of people elsewhere in England can't, is the sounds of America.
Yeah.
Because Liverpool is a port that is open to the Atlantic, and ships that still transport, records are being brought over in ships. And so they come to the port and the Beatles can access them.
Yeah. They can get Elvis, Gene Vincent, Buddy Holly.
And black music.
Yeah.
Which is all, they love all that.
Yes.
So when John and Paul meet at this church fete.
The Woolton
Fete. John is singing a doo-wop song, Come Go With Me.
Yeah.
And he doesn't know the lyrics. And Paul doesn't know the lyrics either, but he knows the lyrics well enough to know that John can't remember them.
Yeah.
But the fact that they both know the song is like a kind of Masonic handshake between them. It's a sign that they have access to a kind of secret information. They are familiar with American music. And so the kind of the potential, the excitement, the drama of what is happening in America, you said that the Beatles introduced color, but I think for the future Beatles, 1950s England is a monochrome country.
Yes.
And America is vibrant Technicolor.
Well, also, the war has been a very different experience. I don't need to tell you for people living in England. They've been bombed. They've seen their cities destroyed. They've paid a terrible price.
Yeah.
They're still rationing. There's still war rationing. So they're growing up in a world where people are coming out of a daze, and there's been a lot of privation. There's been a lot of difficulty.
I also got into the Beatles in the 70s. And when I look back at the 60s, the 60s seemed an impossible distance from the Second World War.
Yeah.
But now you think, I mean, it's only... it's
20
only
years.
20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so close. And when the Beatles are growing up, they are in a city that is cratered with kind of bomb damage. And as you say, the Beatles are born in the war years. John is born during the Blitz.
During a Blitz,
on Liverpool. So George joins John and Paul, and they get joined by Stu Sutcliffe.
Paul's the one who knows George,
doesn't he?
Introduces him, and he plays raunchy on the top of a double-decker bus.
Yeah, and that's enough.
That's enough.
You're in.
Yeah.
And then John's art school friend, Stu Sutcliffe, wins a prize for his art and spends it on a guitar.
Well, John bullies him into, I don't know what it was 80 pounds or 100 pounds or something. He bullies him into buying a bass, which Stu never really learns to play. But he's a cool-looking guy.
He is.
And I think that's an early sign that, yes, the music's important, but
the image is going to matter
who we
too.
are, what we represent, and Stu is an artist. And Paul doesn't love this. He really doesn't like Stu coming in because he can't play. And I think he's very close to John, which may have been a problem for Paul.
Yes. And also there's Pete Best, a top hairdresser in later life, but at the time, the drummer. And so they all go off to Hamburg. And Hamburg equally, I mean, maybe even more than Liverpool, is obviously a city marked by the experience of the Second World War. The British had flattened it. And of course, there were people there who had lived through the Nazi period. And it's always struck me that one of the things that is interesting about Hamburg in the Nazi period is that it's kind of notorious among the Nazi leadership for the enthusiasm of the young people who live there for American and English jazz and swing. And it's a kind of rebellion against the ideals of the Hitler Youth and all of that. And they grow their hair and they listen to jazz and they're particularly into black music. And this is a kind, obviously, I mean, it's the anathema to everything that Nazism represents.
Yeah.
And when the Beatles meet Astrid Kircher and Klaus Voormann, who are kind of middle-class intellectual Germans who are ashamed of the Nazi legacy and therefore are heirs to that tradition of seeing British and American music as something that is expressive of freedom and of opposition to Nazism. That's kind of one of the reasons why they all end up getting on so well.
Well, they're bohemians. They're artists and outsiders looking in, and I think that's very attractive.
Yeah.
To John and Paul, especially, and George. They really like these people. They become good friends, and they're very much influenced by them.
John calls them exes, doesn't he? After existentialists.
Yeah.
And kind of France is the great influence. And in due course, it's Astrid Kircher who will give the Beatles their kind of signature mop top cuts, which is influenced by these kind of European bohemian ideals. But just to reiterate, I mean, this is ultimately a kind of reaction against what the Nazis had represented and that kind of tradition. So there is a case for saying that the mop top is a kind of anti-Nazi haircut. Do you think that's maybe going too far?
I think you've pushed it way too far.
Possibly.
Now I'm listening to all the early Beatles hits as anti-Hitler anthems. I do agree with you that there is clearly, and John said this, Hamburg made them. Going to Hamburg made them because, as Malcolm Gladwell pointed out, they had to do their
100,000 hours.
It always changes.
1 billion hours.
I needed 1 billion hours myself, but it changes them. The volume of work they have to do is incredible. They also need to entertain those crowds, and they get very good at that. They get very good at getting people from peeking in the door to coming in to buying drinks. They do it all.
Makshao.
Yeah, Makshao. They do it with the strength of their personalities and with their music, and they get honed into a diamond.
And they're absolutely off their faces on amphetamines, aren't they?
Prellies.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're on these pills that enable them to play and play and play and play.
The best things in life are free, but you can keep them for the birds and bees. Now give me money. That's what I want. That's what I want. That's what I want. Yeah. That's what I want.
They're living in, I think they share a wall with the theater. So they're living in conditions that aren't safe.
Isn't that where
aren't
George
humane.
loses his virginity and all the Beatles are kind of on bunks watching him or whatever? I mean, it's all very
Yeah.
quite squalid, but kind of but properly rock and roll at a time when in America and England still more so, the music is kind of stopping being quite so rock and roll.
Yeah. I mean, there's this period, I think Chuck Berry violates the Mann Act and has to be, I think he goes to jail or it's a scandal.
Yeah.
Jerry Lee Lewis has his scandal.
He definitely has a scandal.
Buddy Holly dies, and then you have the Big Bopper and Richie Valens.
And Elvis gets drafted, of course.
Elvis gets drafted.
Which the Beatles very narrowly avoid because National Service, which is a thing here in England in the 50s, it gets stopped just before they would have become eligible for it.
And we would all agree that the Beatles would not have done well in National Service.
It would not have been good. Well, because they... it's kind of interesting that when they're driving out to Hamburg for the first time, they go past Arnhem, which is a bridge too far, kind of disastrous. British lose lots of people there. And the story is that John refuses to get out of the van and go and look at the graves. And already perhaps a sense there that war in its totality is something to be rejected. And that, of course, will become a massive theme for John's music and ideals later in life. But I mean, it might be there right from the beginning. Although apparently when he's on the stage in Hamburg, he's always shouting out in English, Krauts, we beat you in the war kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's as always with the Beatles, it's never, there's always a kind of creative tension.
Yeah, John even then is walking that line between, he's goading thugs in a Hamburg crowd to attack him and then relying on security to handle it or a bouncer or someone walking that line between I dare you to hit me and...
Although I think quite a few of the bouncers only kind of had one arm or one leg or whatever because they were kind of maimed in the war. So, quite a crucible, I guess, and explains a lot about the kind of band that the Beatles in due course became. They come back from Hamburg, they go back to Hamburg, then they come back to Liverpool again. And by this point, so 1961, 1962, they're starting to establish themselves as the biggest name in Liverpool.
When they come back to Liverpool, there are people who think that they're a German band because they hear that they've come from Hamburg. So, and they're so polished. I mean, they're a completely different act. I think on the scene in Liverpool, there were bands that didn't take them seriously. Then they come back from Hamburg and they've had this education and they've been transmuted.
They got their leather and they're down in the Cavern and the ceiling is dripping sweat from excited girls who are there in their lunch hour. And it's very fetid and exciting and rock and roll. And it is on the 9th of November, 1961, that a key figure in the story of the Beatles finds his way down the steps into the Cavern. And that, of course, is Brian Epstein.
Yeah. When the Colonel finds Elvis, the Colonel is very well established as a guy who could take over Elvis's contract. It should be pointed out that Brian Epstein is not that figure. He's working at, I believe, his family's
his record
shop. He's never managed anybody.
No.
And he sees this group that really just fascinates him. And
Particularly John. Because Brian is gay.
Yep.
And he definitely, I think, has a thing for John, doesn't he?
Yeah.
But he kind of immediately picks up on the fact that this band is amazing and decides that he is going to try and get them a record contract.
Yeah.
And although he's never managed anyone, he does kind of have links with the music industry. And he's middle class as opposed to the Beatles, who are working class. And in England in the early 60s, that is massively important. And it means that he can make contact with other middle class people, among whom is a producer here in Abbey Road called George Martin. And so famously, Brian Epstein hawks the Beatles around all kinds of record companies, and they turn him down.
Yeah.
Decca famously, guitar groups are on their way out.
Yeah.
But George Martin basically is the last port of call, parlophone at EMI, and he says, "Yeah, okay, I'll give them a go." But it's George Martin is still not entirely convinced, is he?
No, he's not. One point I would make, I think should be made, is that in addition to all of their amazing qualities, the Beatles have insane luck. They have incredible luck, because many people might have approached them and said, "I think I could represent you." Brian Epstein is unusual. He's someone who really loves them for them.
Yeah.
He's someone who really respects them as artists, and he wants to take care of them. Now remember, this is the music business. That doesn't happen. Then who does he take them to? Who do they hook up with? George Martin. The people they meet early on are the essential people. And it's some kind of Hobbit tale where they meet the exact right person at the exact right time.
So George Martin hadn't really been a music producer. He'd been a producer of comedy shows.
The Goon Show.
Of the Goon Show. And the Beatles really appreciate that, but it also means that George Martin can appreciate their zany mop-top humour. So George Harrison famously saying he didn't like George Martin's tie.
Yeah.
And George Martin not being unduly offended by that. And so he decides actually that the Beatles have got something, that they've got personality as well as musical ability. But there is one member of the Beatles he doesn't rate, and Stu Sutcliffe by this point has died of a brain hemorrhage, but Pete Best is still on the scene.
Yeah.
And George Martin says to Brian, he's got to go.
Yeah.
And so the final piece in the jigsaw puzzle now slots into place, namely Ringo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who you've also met, and you said that you gave him a hug once, and his body is now made of teak.
Yes. I've met Ringo a number of times, and one time I gave him a hug, and I thought, he is carved out of a very dense tropical wood. This man works out, I think, obsessively. He just hit his 85th birthday, and I think he could take both of us in a fight. He's in incredible shape. Which
is amazing, because Ringo was born in absolutely, the poorest part, the most bomb-damaged part of Liverpool, and grew up repeatedly being ill. He was always in hospital, kind of missed out on school and all kinds of things. But by the time the Beatles approached him, has established himself as the best drummer in Liverpool.
Yeah.
And again, it's the humor and the personality. Ringo completely gels with them. And George Martin has actually brought a session drummer in to record their first single.
And his name is
Andy White.
Andy White, yes. What's interesting is that people have always wondered or theorized that Pete Best is too good looking, and maybe Paul is jealous and they edge him out. But it's been pretty much conclusively proved that
he wasn't good.
Yeah, he was not a good timekeeper. He couldn't really keep time. And Ringo could play all these different beats, these Latin beats that later on show up in so many Beatles records. So he was the right guy at the right time.
And so Ringo. How would you rate Ringo as a drummer?
Oh, I think he's spectacular. And a lot of top drummers now give it up to Ringo. His feel, he's minimal. And there's a great thing you can see on YouTube, which is if Keith Moon had been the Beatles drummer, if John Bonham had been the Beatles drummer, and you listen to them and you're like, yeah, that wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't work. So is he Gene Krupa or Buddy Rich? No, he's not. He's the best possible drummer for the Beatles.
Yeah. And actually, so there's the footage that you can see in the background is from a new version of the Anthology documentary series out on Disney. And in these episodes, there's amazing footage of Ringo drumming. You can completely see what he is giving the Beatles. So, as I say, the final piece in the jigsaw puzzle is there.
Yeah.
And so their first single, Love Me Do, comes out in Britain, reaches 17.
Love, love me do. You know I love you. I'll always be true. So please, love me do.
Brian's shop has bought in box loads of it, crates of the stuff, flogged it across Liverpool. But it's still not obvious that they are going to completely change everything.
Yeah.
And it's when they then turn up to record their first album, Please Please Me.
Mm-hmm.
Last night I said these words to my girl. I know you never even tried, girl. Come on, 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 come on. Please, 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 oh yeah, like I please you.
George Martin famously says, "Gentlemen, you just made your first number one."
Yeah.
The sense that this is something special. And one of the key things is that they're not just recording covers. So we should probably just talk about that.
Yeah.
Because you said earlier, this is something that marks them out as distinctive.
Yeah.
But it is really unusual, isn't it?
It's revolutionary. It's unheard of. So what John and Paul were always interested in almost the Brill building tradition of being songwriters. And Paul used to think about being a songwriter, even if it meant he wasn't the one performing the song. They just thought about songwriting. They were working on it for a long time. They're writing things, but not of the quality that they'd later have. But then this moment comes when they've done Love Me Do. It's
So-so.
It's so-so. You listen to it now and you think, I don't know what all the excitement was. And the truth is it was number 17.
Yeah.
Brian probably helped them boost them up the charts by buying records himself. So they really need to make it. John has a song that's in the vein of, he's thinking of a Roy Orbison song. And it's a very slow kind of Roy Orbison ballad. Come on, come on, come on, come on.
Please, 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 oh yeah, like I please you.
And they're working on it. It's not coming together. And then they decide, let's pick up the tempo. And they have it. And that's their first number one. The Stones, Dominic's not here, but I wish I could say this to his face. The Stones are doing covers down in London. They hear that there's this group up in Liverpool that's making records, which the Stones are not doing, and they're writing them themselves. And they're flabbergasted, and I think skeptical.
And inspired in the long run.
In the long run.
run.
It took them a while.
Yeah.
Dominic, it took them a while.
But they don't do badly either.
No, they do just fine.
But the quickening up the pace, the harmonies, the shaking of the hair, the twisting and the shouting.
Mm-hmm.
When the album goes out, and then She Loves You, and a succession of singles, and the live performances, and girls start screaming.
Yeah.
And they start kind of pushing at cordons of policemen. And the Beatles have mentioned they like jelly beans, and so they start hurling jelly beans.
Yeah, George had said in an interview, I like these, whatever they're called, jelly beans, and from then on, he's pelted with them.
And so quite dangerous because they, could take out an eye or two.
Yeah, George should have mentioned a softer treat. Maybe a marshmallow.
Jelly babies, perhaps.
Yeah.
But this is a kind of explosion of public teenage female joy of a kind that no one has ever seen before. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's explained in part by the charisma and the music of the Beatles, but it's also explained by, to put it in Marxist terms, the fact that for the first time, teenage girls have spending money and leisure time.
Yeah.
And so you see there again, you talked about how lucky the Beatles are that they are riding this crest of this wave of growing material prosperity that is kind of giving birth to the idea of the teenager as a consumer.
Yeah. So another way in which they get incredibly lucky, the timing is spectacular because, as you say, if this had been 10 years earlier, I don't think this maybe could have happened. But they're at the right time, perfect time, where a whole group of teenagers can express a different opinion than their parents, which teenagers want to do. They want to make something theirs. And here are these four perfect people with great music, and they can elect to spend their money on these records, and they can have their favorite Beatle, and it starts to fuel this mania.
And do you think the fact that all the bands and the singers that we've talked about up till now who influenced the Beatles have been male, but actually the Beatles are really, really into female groups as well?
Yes.
Do you think that that's kind of contributory factor to their popularity with specifically female audience?
In his book, Ian Leslie wrote this fantastic book that I absolutely love. I think it's the best Beatles book that's been written in quite a while.
So John and Paul, isn't it?
John and Paul. Yeah. And in it, he points out something I hadn't really thought of, which is a lot of early Beatles music is influenced by doo-wop groups. If someone just told me that without me thinking about it, I'd say, well, that's stupid. But no, it's not. It's true. They are performing a lot of stuff by male doo-wop groups and also female groups. And I think they are just going for what's the best music. And they are also very interested in getting the vocals right. So they play their own instruments, but I think their secret weapon is their vocal ability.
Yeah, the harmonies.
The harmonies, and Everly Brothers, I think, were a huge influence on them. But yes, they will play. I mean, Ringo sings "Boys" and doesn't. They don't.
So the Shirelles number.
Shirelles
change it.
They don't change. It would be so easy to say "girls." It would be so easy to change it, and they don't.
Yeah.
And it's a little strange, but it's fantastic. And so, yes, they're not overly concerned with gender. They're not overly concerned with, no, we've got to stick to this image or that image. They're just going where the best music is.
Now, I know what Dominic would say about the secret of their popularity is also the fact that they are just edgy enough. So they say, "She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah," rather than, as Paul's father thought they should have sung, "She loves you, yes, yes, yes."
Yeah.
But they're not going too far. So the kind of the prelly popping and the, all the kind of Hamburg stuff is being kind of slightly pushed to one side. And Brian has put them in suits by this point. And in the long run, it's the Stones who will play the part of the kind of the bad boys of rock and roll. The Beatles are just edgy enough, but no more so.
Right.
And they famously they play at the Royal Variety Show, and John has his witty quip.
For our last number, I'd like to ask your help. The people in the cheaper seats, clap your hands. And the rest of you, if you just rattle your jewelry.
Which Noel Coward was hated that. I don't know why I remember that, but Noel Coward thought that was atrocious.
Did he?
And that performance brings up something really interesting, which is the Beatles represent this new thing, which is class is irrelevant. And they're playing in front of the Queen in a royal performance, and John makes this joke that is very much about class, and Noel Coward, I think, got upset. People thought, well, how could he? I mean, some people were really taken aback by that. But they are four working class guys who don't change their accents. They don't adopt James Mason accents when they make it big. They have thick Liverpudlian accents, and they never try to change it. They don't work on their diction or anything. Yes, they wear the suits because they are ambitious. They're extremely ambitious, and they will do what it takes to get to the top.
So, I mean, it's great to be number one in Britain, to be going around all these kind of market towns and selling out concerts and headlining and having repeated number ones and all kinds of things. But they have been massively influenced by American music. And for people in Britain, to break it in America is the ultimate dream. And British artists have not succeeded in making it in America at all. And Brian is kind of trying to boost their career in America, but it's not really working. And America is distracted, apart from anything else, by, America has its trauma, because when the Beatles' second album with the Beatles comes out in Britain, it's the same day that Kennedy is shot in Dallas. And it is often said that plunges America into a state of kind of mourning and bereavement that leaves them kind of wanting almost to be cheered up. Do you think there's anything in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's heresy to use the word luck with an assassination and a day that's awful. But I will say, I do these history experiments in my head sometimes. What if the Beatles had been booked November 30th on the Ed Sullivan Show? What if they had been booked in December? It's too soon.
So they end up going to the US
in February.
In February, by which point I Want to Hold Your Hand is number one.
And when I touch you, I feel happy inside. It's such a feeling that my love I can hide.
And it's crucial that they go there with that single already number one, so that they're not going as, supplicants.
Yeah.
They're going as stars.
This is one of those moments where Paul has subsequently said, we knew to wait until we had number one hits in the US to go over. And if you look into it, I don't think it holds up. I think that Ed Sullivan had been flying in Europe. His plane has a stopover, I think, I don't know if he's in Sweden or he's someplace, and he sees screaming fans and he says, what's that all about? And he says, it's this group from England, the Beatles.
These youngsters from Liverpool who call themselves the Beatles.
Yeah. And so the booking is made before the Beatles have hit number one in America. Again, the timing is perfect.
Isn't it? Yeah.
But again, it's not just luck, but luck plays a big part in it.
So they land in at JFK, and there's huge press attention, and there are crowds of screaming girls.
Which surprises them.
It does. And it obviously surprises the US media as well. There's kind of incredible footage in the Anthology documentary of them arriving outside the hotel with girls just hurling themselves at the window. And it's like they're in a zombie film. And it's like the kind of zombie plague has crossed the Atlantic from Britain, and now it's arrived in New York. And the screaming and the hysteria becomes part of the story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it is present when the Beatles appear on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yeah.
And that show, I think, is still the second most viewed program in US history.
Yeah. I think some reality show has the number one spot, I believe. Someone eating cockroaches. About 2 years ago, Paul McCartney released pictures that he took, because all of them had cameras. They'd been given cameras. So Paul called it the eyes of the storm, because it's all of them. But he took pictures constantly. And I had a chance to interview him about it. And he was talking about being in the center of all that and how surprised they were.
Storm.
Yeah. And he was just taking all these photos of, a lot of them are just people losing their minds and staring at them. And I think it was George who later said, we just became an excuse for people to lose their minds.
Yeah.
People wanted to lose their minds.
Yeah.
They needed some kind of fuse or trigger. And this group shows up. And yes, the music's great. And yes, they have these incredible personalities. But it's something completely new. And everyone says it is time to go insane.
Yeah. And so that's something that the Beatles are introducing to America. But obviously for the Beatles as well, going to America is a kind of pilgrimage, because this is where the music that they have most loved and have been most inspired comes from.
Yeah.
And, we've said they're particularly influenced by Black American music. And so one of the issues that comes up in 1964 when they're going on tour around the US is the question of will they play in segregated stadiums? Because that is still very much a thing. Civil rights movement is still ongoing. And the Beatles are absolutely forthright about this.
Yeah.
That they will not play. And they managed to force an odd stadium here or there to change the ticketing. At other ones, they just say, well, we're not going to play there. So what kind of impact do you think that has?
I think it's massive. I mean, first of all, it shows that they are not going to bend the knee. They are principled. There are things that they think are important, they care about. There's the fact that they will not play in front of segregated audiences. And then almost maybe more important, in their press conferences where people hang on every word when asked what groups do they like, they list all these black groups, and they talk about Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, and they talk about the Supremes, and they mention so many black musicians and acts. And it's not calculated. That's just what
they love.
That's what they love. But it certainly, I think, is a beautiful moment.
When they're in New York, and the first days of their arrival, they get given the chance to kind of DJ on various radio stations, don't they? And they're just endlessly playing black female groups.
Yeah.
Because that's what they love. That's their kind of great influence. And so that sense of the fact that they're not just musicians, but that what they say might matter. I mean, that lasts through 1964 and it lasts through 1965. And there is an assumption that the Beatles will always give interesting copy, but there may be the potential for them to say something that might ultimately turn out to be inflammatory.
Yes, there's a constant expectation from the minute the Beatles arrive on the scene, and it's going so well, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Success, 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 smash hit, smash hit, smash hit. When is the bubble going to burst? And so the pump is primed for something to go wrong.
So in March 1966, there's a journalist called Maureen Cleave who has known the Beatles very well, known them for about 3 years, is kind of friends with them. And she interviews each one of the Beatles, and it runs in the press as an industry what it's like to be a Beatle.
Yeah.
And one of the interviews is with John, and he has been reading quite a lot about religion, and he gives Maureen some good copy. So he says, Christianity will go, it will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right and I'll be proved right. We're more popular than Jesus now. And so this runs in the British press, and nobody in Britain could care less about it.
Yeah.
And these articles then get sold on to publication in America, and they appear, and still nobody really pays any attention to it. But then there are people in the Bible Belt in America who are not keen on the Beatles, sees the Beatles' long hair as satanic. Some of them aren't keen on the whole anti-segregation stage. And when some of these people read what John has said, they're less than enthused, aren't they?
They're less than enthused. It's funny because we're in 1966, but it's kind of before the internet, it's an internet moment. Because today, John would have said that on Wednesday at 3:00 in the afternoon, and there'd be outrage.
Yeah.
On Thursday, this is an interview he does with Maureen Cleave. It takes a while.
Yeah.
It actually takes quite a while for it to finally surface and find the right person to hate it.
Yeah.
And then it becomes this explosion, this huge controversy. And the article comes out in England and then makes its way across to the States. It takes some time, but then it starts to pick up traction.
And the Beatles are coming back to America for a tour.
Yeah.
And by the time they're ready to leave Britain to fly to New York, all hell is breaking loose. And the huge question for listeners is, will this finish the Beatles off? Is this the end of the Beatles? It's all hotting up, and I don't think I can take the tension right now. I need a bit of a breather. So let's have a quick break. Hello, welcome back to The Rest is History. I am with Conan O'Brien and we are talking Beatles. And this is part 2. It's the blue album to the red album of part 1. We left you on an absolute cliffhanger. John Lennon has made unwise comments about Jesus and provoked outrage in the Bible Belt in the United States. And the problem for him is that the Beatles are due to go on a tour to the United States. So Conan O'Brien, who has replaced Dominic on this show because Dominic refuses to talk about the Beatles, because Conan, what we didn't perhaps go into in great detail in the first episode was the actual music. And before the Beatles go on the tour that will bring them to America and all the Jesus kerfuffle, they have recorded an album that many now see as their greatest album, Revolver.
You've seen 7 wonders, and your bed is green, but you can't see me.
Are you a particular fan of Revolver?
Huge fan of Revolver. Revolver is very interesting because the Beatles are now recording music that would be very difficult to perform live. And live performance is a huge part of the Beatles' engine. Eleanor Rigby.
Tomorrow Never Knows.
Tomorrow Never Knows.
Which is kind of playing things backwards.
Yeah.
Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. It is not dying. It is not dying.
These are all very difficult, if not impossible. Now it could be done with modern technology, but they've become real recording geniuses and artists, and it's taking them in this other direction. So they finished Revolver, and enough time has gone by because I think people used to say, well, Sgt. Pepper or Abbey Road is their greatest, and those are obviously fantastic. But Revolver, I think if you asked one of the Beatles, they might have the greatest fondness for Revolver.
And there's a kind of tension between what they can do in a studio but not reproduce on a stage, and the fact that they are starting to get a bit fed up with touring, because it's not only that they can't reproduce, the musical effects that they've got on Revolver on stage, it's also the fact that they can't barely hear themselves play. Yeah. And they know that most people in their audience, because they're all screaming, they can't really hear them either. So that's frustrating.
We just became like lip syncing, miming. And sometimes things would break down and nobody'd know. And so it wasn't doing the music any good.
And then after they've finished Revolver, they go on a world tour and they go to Japan and then they go to the Philippines and they have a kind of awful run-in with Imelda Marcos.
Yes.
Famous for her shoe collection.
Yes. I was just there. I was just in the Philippines and I went to the Manila hotel, which is where the Beatles stayed.
But you didn't turn down an invitation to tea with the head of the Philippines.
And get in trouble. I did. And I was bullied at the airport.
Like the Beatles were.
Like the Beatles were. No, that was totally not the Beatles' fault. The Marcoses announced that the Beatles will be appearing at the palace and having tea and then greeting a bunch of children, but no one asked the Beatles. And they're, as you guys would say, knackered.
Yeah,
and
they were knackered.
They were knackered.
Yeah.
They just wanted to use the loo and then take a lift. I'll never be invited again. But they were tired. They didn't want to do that. They said, no, we're not going to do that. And then, of course, the Marcos family said, this is a terrible snub. And they were in their hotel room watching this all unfold. And then they were hated throughout the Philippines.
And there was a kind of real physical threat of danger. Yeah. And they kind of, they made it out to their flight and it was all really traumatic. Yeah. And they left the Philippines, said, we're never going back. And I don't think they ever did, actually. But kind of in a sense, worse was to come, because we now come to the way that John Lennon's comments on Christianity was playing out in America. Yeah. And there's kind of escalating outrage in the Bible Belt. DJs there are inviting people to bring their records and their Beatles wigs and to kind of burn them.
Don't forget to take your Beatle records and your Beatle paraphernalia to any one of our 14 pickup points in Birmingham, Alabama.
And lots of people are kind of carrying around placards saying, Jesus died for your sins, John Lennon. And the Ku Klux Klan are getting in on the act. And it's a pretty menacing environment, isn't it? Yeah. And when the Beatles land in America and they are asked about this, you can see when John is speaking at the press conference, I mean, he looks traumatized.
Yeah. Well, apparently he's a tough guy and he speaks his mind and he's not afraid to back down. But this was traumatic for him, and he realizes that he's put the whole thing in jeopardy. And at one point, he cries, apparently breaks down crying just with the group and Brian, and says, I'll do what I have to do to fix this.
And he does.
He does. He gives an apology. It's a bit of a non-apology apology.
You know, but I'm not saying that we're better or greater or comparing us with Jesus Christ as a person or God as a thing or whatever it is. You know, I just said what I said and it was wrong or was taken wrong, and now it's all this.
But he clarifies his remarks. And of course, people that don't like the Beatles won't be satisfied, but it feels like it's enough for them to get to move on.
And so they decide after this that they have had enough of touring. And so from this point on, they essentially are going to be meeting in the studio and developing albums of increasing complexity, technological and musical. But there is also a sense, isn't there, I think, that what that imbroglio in America in 1966 had kind of revealed was the scale of the cultural rupture that is going on in the 60s between an increasingly kind of countercultural take on religion and the Vietnam War and a kind of host of issues, and a kind of a conservatism that is still very much there. And there is a real kind of cultural divide starting to widen.
Yeah.
And as you go from 1966 into 1967, this will become very apparent because 1967 will be famous for the Summer of Love. And it is the Beatles who provide, in a sense, the soundtrack for that with two massive kind of musical monuments. The first double A side, Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane.
Penny Lane, there is a barber showing photographs of every head he's had the pleasure to know, and all the people that come and go stop and say hello. On the corner is a banker with a motor car, the little children laughing him behind his back, and the banker never wears a Mac in the pouring rain. Very strange. Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes. There beneath the blue suburban skies, I sit and meanwhile back in Penny Lane.
And then their album, Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to remember that 66, we're just 2 years away from Nixon being elected president. And what Nixon reveals and his campaign is that there is a huge part of the United States that isn't down with the kids and wants no part of it. And through the Beatles, we're starting to see this showing up. And we're going to see it very clearly in 2 years. But it's one of the reasons they stop touring. They can't hear themselves. The technology for touring on the Beatles scale was terrible. They're still using these relatively small Vox amps. When they play giant stadiums, they're piping it through the public announce address system. So they can't hear themselves, people can't hear them. And I think, John Lennon always said they were a terrific live band and they got something from that, but now there's no communicating with an audience that size. There's no give and take. So they've got to move on. They take a break after they stop touring. John goes off and makes How I Won the War.
Yeah. That's where he starts wearing his round glasses.
It was a government issue, granny glasses.
NHS glasses,
And then Paul does the score for the Family Way, I think. Everyone takes a little bit of a
breather.
A little bit of a breather. And then they get back together. Paul has an idea and they start working on Sgt. Pepper. But you mentioned that they have this incredible single they put out, an A-side and a B-side, which is Strawberry Fields Forever, and then Penny Lane. They were meant to be part of the new album, but because of this demand that there always be new singles, two of the greatest songs the Beatles would ever make are put on an A and a B side and put out and now can't be on the album, which today people would say, well, that's silly. Put it on the album too.
Yeah.
But they were very strict about that.
You mentioned how Nixon in America is lurking in the wings. And it would be remiss of me at this point not to ventriloquize Dominic, whose great point is that Sgt. Pepper will be outsold by The Sound of Music in 1967. Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields, which lots of critics have said is the kind of cultural pinnacle of post-war British achievement. I think without a doubt, the greatest single the Beatles ever released. It's their first one for eons not to become number one. And it's kept off the top spot by Engelbert Humperdinck.
Yeah.
So they're not having it all their way, but it is a transcendent achievement, isn't it? And it takes them back to Liverpool. So both Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields are locations in Liverpool.
Yeah. I think Strawberry Fields Forever might be my favorite Beatles song.
Penny Lane for me with the trumpet. But
Yeah.
I mean, they're both so incredible.
They also show you both sides of this incredible songwriting team and their perfection.
Living is easy with eyes closed. Misunderstanding all you see. It's getting hard to be someone, but it all works out. It doesn't matter much to me. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry Fields forever.
And so this is how good the Beatles have become. You take these two songs and you don't even put them on the Watershed album, Sgt. Pepper. You take them off and issue them as a single. That would be unheard of today.
I mean, the only track I think that transcends it is A Day in the Life, which is the last song on Sgt. Pepper and perfectly fuses the best of John and Paul. And is designed to be a kind of overwhelming symphonic experience. Here we are in Abbey Road. They invited, vast orchestra to come in and play all kinds of mad tunes, and crashes out, and you're left with this incredible silence which continues on the album. And it's all very groovy and it's all very countercultural. And you do get the sense with Sgt. Pepper that the Beatles are starting to, as the Queen put it, go a bit odd. So it's not just that the music is more radical and edgy and kind of exploring new ways of developing, but they're all, the facial hair is starting to develop and the hair is getting even longer.
Yes. I know that you and Dominic have beard obsessions, and the beards start to show up, the mustaches, and soon beards. But it's a concept album. It really isn't. Paul had this idea that it would be a whole album done by a fictional band called Sgt. Pepper's, but they stick with that idea for maybe one or two songs.
And they give up.
And then they give up, but it doesn't matter. It's really about that amazing cover.
It's called the first concept album. It doesn't go anywhere. Mr. Kite, all my contributions have absolutely nothing to do with this idea of Sgt. Pepper and his band. But it works because we said it worked, and that's how it appeared.
It was 20 years ago today. Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. They've been going in and out of style, but they're guaranteed to raise a smile. So may I introduce to you the active number all these years, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
They're dealing now with their work as real art. To own that album is to own a piece of art.
And it's seen as exemplifying the summer of love and this radical developments that are taking place in San Francisco, particularly Haight-Ashbury, as well as in kind of Carnaby Street and swinging London. And there is a track on Sgt. Pepper called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which people point out, well, the initials of that song, LSD. And this is the time when the Beatles, even Paul, who's been very reluctant to take it, starts taking LSD. I mean, they always denied that it was, but it's kind of hovering in the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
And that sense of drugs as opening the mind, you can tune in and discover new things about yourself. That is also part of the excitement for people who are listening to Sgt. Pepper of what is going on, isn't it? The sense that new opportunities are opening up.
There's this new idea that drugs can provide all these positive benefits.
Yeah.
And this is, a number of years before we start losing people to drugs. And John tends to overdo things. So he's all in. He's all in on LSD to the point where he's positively green from it.
I was aware of them smoking pot. I wasn't aware that they did anything really serious. In fact, I was so innocent that I actually took John up onto the roof when he was having an LSD trip, not knowing what it was.
Paul takes LSD because John is out of, off his face, and he wants to kind of, accompany John in his, this terrible kind of experience. Yeah. Which I was finding kind of very touching, moving illustration of their friendship.
He felt the need to, I've got to do this too, so that I can know what he knows, but he never goes as far as John. But this opens up a lot in their music. And of course, John is so influenced already by Alice in Wonderland imagery.
So that's the other thing, isn't it? That even as they are kind of pushing at the limits in a kind of Timothy Leary kind of way, they are still drawing on the traditions of their childhood. So you meant Alice in Wonderland, but even Sgt. Pepper, I mean, they're kind of dressing up in Edwardian style uniforms, and there's the fairground noises in The Benefit of Mr. Kite, which was a kind of fairground poster. There's a kind of Edwardian vibe there, even as the hippies are crowding in.
I have a theory that many artists get lost in the 60s because you start to think, if I think of it and I do it, it must be good. There are many terrible songs written in the 60s, and there are many terrible movies made in the 60s, especially in the later 60s. People can tend to lose their way because there's this concept that we just made it, it's wacky, it's what happened, it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't have to. I think the Beatles survive it really well because they're rooted in this discipline, the music hall, music structure, production, fine production. They're rooted in all these things that help give them ballast, even though, yes, they're taking LSD, they've been smoking a lot of pot. They always have that ballast of there's work to be done and it needs to be good.
And I think also they consistently have a sense of the ridiculous. Yeah. They can recognize when people are making idiots of themselves. So it's interesting that George goes to San Francisco and he hangs out in Haight-Ashbury, and he wants to see the flower power revolution and hang out with the hippies and stuff. And actually he thinks there's quite a lot of casualties here and decides it's not really for him.
I mean, everywhere we went, people were smiling and, sitting on lawns, drinking tea, festivals of music and stuff. I mean, that Summer of Love, a lot of that was bullshit, really. It was all what the press was saying.
And so he wants to explore alternative ways of attaining enlightenment. And by great good fortune, he is put in touch with a guy called the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who has just turned up in London. Yeah. And George persuades the other Beatles and Mick Jagger and Marianne Faithfull to get on a train with the Maharishi and go to Bangor in Wales. Yep. So what's your take on the Maharishi?
Well, I think the Beatles are very curious people, and they always want to advance to the next level and learn more. And so when they hear about this Maharishi, they think, let's give it a try, let's hear him out. So that's what the trip, I think, to Bangor's about. It's a getaway, it's a happening. Yeah. They all go together. Of course, Cynthia misses the train, which is very symbolic.
And also symbolic is the fact that while they're in Bangor, they get terrible news, which is that Brian Epstein, their manager, the guy who had shaped their career and kind of kept them on track, has died of an overdose back in London.
Yeah. And there's footage right after they walk out. They're in Wales. They've listened to the Maharishi. They get the news that Brian's died. And bright lights and a camera, and you can watch this footage. They are completely traumatized.
Well, I don't know what to say, we've only just heard, and it's hard to think of things to say.
But he was just a beautiful fella, you know, and it's terrible.
What are your plans now?
Well, we haven't made any, you know. I mean, we only just heard of it.
That was kind of stunning, because we were off on this sort of finding the meaning of life, and there he was, dead.
And much later, John said, I knew then we'd had it. That this was the guy who kept everything together, and he's gone. And particularly traumatic, I think, for John and probably Paul too, because they had both lost key figures of their life.
Yeah.
You know, as kids, they had lost their moms. You can see in that footage that they are dumbstruck.
The interviewer says to them, you know, what did the Maharishi say? And John's way, he basically gave us these platitudes.
Yeah.
And John at this level isn't saying they're platitudes.
I understand that this afternoon Maharishi conferred with you all. Could I ask you what advice he offered you?
He told us not to get overwhelmed by grief, and to whatever thoughts we have of Brian, to keep them happy, because any thoughts we have of him will travel to him wherever he is.
But you can see that already John is not the kind of person probably who's going to think that the Maharishi is the guy to replace Brian in his life. I mean, you said that John will ultimately say this is where it all ends. I mean, let's explore that a bit further.
Yeah, they're at a crossroads now. And it's funny, there'd always been probably some chafing against Brian and his suits, and they had probably at times chafed, you know, at some of his ideas and concepts. But then when he's gone, I think they probably realized how much he had held them all together.
And you said in the first half that the Beatles are very good at not going off on kind of mad lunatic journeys that turn out to be disasters.
Yeah.
But actually, that is what they do
Yeah.
in the wake of Brian's death.
Yes.
Because Paul, who almost by default is kind of stepping up to play the managerial role, says, well, why don't we go on a kind of groovy road trip around Britain? It could be a magical mystery tour.
The magical mystery tour is waiting to take you away. Waiting to take you away.
And again, it's this kind of idea of traditional British culture that you get on a bus and you go off to Blackpool or something, combined with people claiming to be walruses and such like. So it's a kind of fusion of the psychedelic and the kind of seaside, but it's an absolute disaster.
Well,
I
I think one of the problems is that the Beatles are very confident people, because when they've had to try things and do things, they're extremely highly competent. They haven't had a failure, but now they extend it to how hard could it be to direct and make a cohesive film. And I think Paul gets on the floor and he has a giant sheet of paper and he draws a circle. And then his way of creating the movie is, I think, to section off parts of the circle and arrows.
mean, I like it.
Yeah. He would say it has great moments in it. He would say, look, it was shot in color. It was aired by the BBC on Boxing Day and in black and white on little screens. That's not the way it was meant to be seen. And it holds up if you really look at it. And there are a bunch of good things in it, but at the time it's seen as a disaster. It gets panned by the critics. People think the Beatles have lost their minds. It's another big bump in the road for them, but I shouldn't say that.
In no way terminal.
Not at all.
And I think the I Am a Walrus sequence, one of John's great songs, kind of ends up with King Lear muttering in the background.
Oh, I mean,
they're all goo-goo-goo-jooing in the background, and it's, I think, one of their great moments.
I love the video they made in Magical Mystery Tour for I Am the Walrus. They seem to be at some kind of military complex, and it looks like they spent all of 7 minutes setting up the scene with a piano and impromptu goofy masks and bald cap wigs that are just applied with no glue. But it's fun, and it's them having fun and goofing around, which is infectious. So
the goofing around, has, that's been fundamental to the Beatles right from the very beginning, right back to the days of the Quarrymen or whatever. What is slightly newer is the idea of very earnestly going off and getting enlightenment in the Himalayas, which is what then happens early in 1968, isn't it? And the Maharishi reappears because he's got a kind of a big place out in Rishikesh, and he says, "Come on out and sit at my feet, learn wisdom."
When the Maharishi died several years ago, someone wrote a really thoughtful piece which said he's an important part of the Beatles story because after Brian's death, they've all had it. They're fraying. Their lives are chaotic. And they do a very unusual thing for the biggest stars on earth. They go to a retreat. They don't bring electric guitars. They bring these acoustic guitars, I think these Martin guitars, and they sit around and there's quiet and peace. And there's nothing to do except chant. And they start writing songs.
Yeah.
And essentially most of the White Album was written during that period. Like anything else, they take a moment and they make it work to their advantage. So even though they didn't find enlightenment and spirituality, they wrote a ton of songs they might not have written otherwise.
Well, they kind of respond in different ways, don't they? So Ringo has gone out with baked beans.
He has a suitcase filled with Heinz baked beans because of his stomach.
He's worried about his stomach.
Yeah.
Paul is, he's kind of into it and kind of not really.
Yeah.
John has a massive bust-up, I feel, and he writes an excoriation of the Maharishi, which he titles Sexy Sadie, because he's worried about, whether the Maharishi will be too cross with him or whatever. For George, Indian spirituality opens up entire, portals through which he goes and will never come back. I mean, it's a massive, massive experience for him, a life-changing experience.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know Sexy Sadie, the original title was Maharishi. They made it a song. It's almost as if lawyers showed up and said, you have to change that.
You'll get yours yet.
Yeah. Originally it was Maharishi, you'll get yours yet. And it was the other Beatles saying, let's think of another title. Yeah, he didn't want to look like anyone had made a fool of him. So he's very angry and rejects it completely.
Yet another of the many songs that emerges from that period. And as you say, it goes on to the White Album. And I suppose two things to say about the White Album. First is it's white. I mean, it's not actually called the White Album, is it? It's called the Beatles. But it's such a deliberate contrast with the kind of technicolor of Sgt. Pepper, just this white album. And the other thing is that it's a double album because they kind of feel we've got so many songs, we want to put it all on. I know that George Martin later regretted that. What do you think? Do you think it should have been just a brilliant single album? Or do you have room for Revolution 9?
I say let the Beatles be the Beatles. And so I know George Martin thought, it should just be one perfectly produced album, not a double album, but I'm on the Paul side of that. He says this in the Anthology. He says, people say maybe it could have been this or it could have been that, and maybe there's some songs in there that are too many. And he said, oh, come on, it's the Beatles, it's the White Album.
I'm not a great one for that. Maybe it was too many of that. Look, what do you mean? It was great, it's sold, it's the bloody Beatles White Album, shut up.
The Beatles still have so many great songs left in them, and particularly, I guess, Paul does, because by this point, John is starting to become increasingly disenchanted with his identity as a Beatle. And it's kind of fueled, I guess, by a couple of things. One is that he's starting to get seriously into heroin, which is obviously quite a drag on one's creativity. But the other thing is that he's got a new woman in his life, hasn't he? So he was married to Cynthia, but by 1968, no longer.
Yeah, John has met this artist, Yoko Ono, and he's infatuated with her. And this is, obviously many people say, well, this is what ended up breaking up the Beatles, but I think that's not true. People always want to blame somebody for something that I think would have happened anyway. And so, no, I don't think Yoko broke up the Beatles. She certainly creates strain in some of the recording sessions.
So I've actually been in a bag. The Tate Modern here in London did a show of Yoko's art 2 or 3 years ago. There was an opportunity to get in a bag, and we went in a bag and did a happening.
Okay. I hate to top you. I've been in a bag with Yoko. Yoko came on the show and she surprised me with a bag, and she thought that I'd be too uptight to get into it with her. But of course, being a terrible ham, I said, absolutely, we both got in the bag.
And you're quite tall. Was the bag big enough
It
to
was
contain
big
you?
enough. It was an extra large bag. I take an XXL in the bag. But I got into the bag with Yoko, and then we were inside, and there's a live studio audience. And she said, "What do we do now?" She said, "Well, that's it. Now we just get out of the bag and go to commercial." And I said, "No, Yoko, we have to do something because that's the comedy rule." So I start handing my clothes out of the bag. And then we emerged from the bag. I didn't take everything off, but I took up an article of her clothing and put it on, which looked absurd.
Because Yoko had a thing where people would cut her clothing off, didn't
Yeah.
she? I mean, it's quite something to have been in a bag with Yoko. I mean, do you feel one of the great moments of your life? Or
It's the greatest moment of my life, and I have been at the birth of both of my children. So I'm a sociopath.
Yeah. No, you're a fan of Yoko's art.
Yeah. The saddest thing to me about this period are the clips I see where you can tell John is impaired. He's on heroin or trying to come off heroin, and it makes me sad.
There'd kind of been, I think, a kind of gentleman's agreement among the police that it was fine to arrest the Rolling Stones for drug offences, but you leave the Beatles alone. That sense is starting to fade by now, and John and Yoko are arrested, and George is arrested. So there's a sense that the Beatles are becoming fair game now.
There was a hierarchy in the pop world.
Yeah.
Beatles are on top, then the Rolling Stones, then the Who, Kinks, way at the bottom, Herman's Hermits. But now things are changing. You can arrest a Beatle. You can arrest a Beatle and charge them.
So Paul, meanwhile, he is still very keen on being a Beatle, keeping the Beatles on track. And his response to John's breakup with Cynthia is to drive down to Wadebridge from London to see Cynthia and John and Cynthia's son, Julian. And he writes one of the great Beatles singles.
Yeah. Hey Jude.
Hey Jude.
Yeah.
They play it live on David Frost's show. And it's their kind of first live performance for a very long while.
It's my pleasure to introduce now in their first live appearance for goodness knows how long in front of an audience, the Beatles.
Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. Remember to let her into your heart. Then you can start to make it better. Hey Jude, don't be afraid. You were made to go out and get her. The minute you let her under your skin, then you begin to make it better.
And also it's inordinately long, isn't it? So that's another kind of Beatles first.
It breaks all these rules. No track has been that long. And at the time, someone said by that point, people thought, well, the Beatles have had it. And then Hey Jude comes out, and it's a massive, massive hit.
And there's this amazing account of how Paul has the tapes, and he's kind of driving through the English countryside. And they're going back to London. They want to have, take a break. And they arrive in this picture perfect village, and there's a pub, and the pub is open, and Paul goes in there, and he plays Hey Jude on the piano for people there, and then he plays the track, and people will always remember it. You know, it's one of the kind of examples of Beatles magic, that you're just sitting in a pub and suddenly Paul McCartney walks in and plays Hey Jude for you. That sense that magic is still there is obviously a kind of powerful motivator for Paul, but also for the other Beatles as well. And so they are prepared to listen to him when he proposes that they get back.
Yeah.
That they get back to kind of be, doing live shows. The footage that got taken of those sessions, which were kind of often seen as being very difficult and troubled. Peter Jackson kind of took the footage, didn't he, and made it into this incredible film where you can actually witness the process of songs being made.
I mean, a lot of things I loved about Get Back. I'm a geek, so getting to see all the equipment, how it really worked is fascinating. But basically, the greatest thing is seeing these guys together, and they're still making each other laugh. You get glimpses of the process.
There's so many bits in it I loved, but I love the bit where, so Paul by now is with Linda, who he will end up marrying. The most eligible bachelor in the world will get hitched to Linda. And Linda and Yoko are talking, and in the background, Paul is composing Get Back.
Yeah.
And it's like kind of watching, I don't know, Michelangelo think, oh, I don't know, should I have Adam and God and their fingers tied? Maybe, I don't know.
He's in the background, yeah.
It's so brilliant. But also it's the fact that all of them look so cool. I mean, George just looks brilliantly cool in it.
They're also just little fun things. I don't know what time of day it is, but Mao will say, does anyone want anything? And they'll all want some wine or beer.
Cup of tea.
Yeah. There's always a lot of toast. And you're like, this is the biggest band in the world. And they've got, there's not a bowl of cocaine. It's toast.
Yeah.
It's all very British.
Although you can see that John is really not well. Of the four of them, John is the one who's most kind of faded at that point. Although they were very keen to have a kind of spectacular climax to this process of filming.
Yeah.
And so there was talk about doing them on a cruise ship or doing it in a Roman amphitheatre in Africa. But then they haven't really got the energy for any of this.
No.
And so they decide that they will have a rooftop concert on the Apple building in Savile Row.
But there's hemming and hawing up until the moment. This is where Peter Jackson's documentary is so great. He lets you know that they're still in a back room as the equipment's all set up and they're ready to go on the rooftop. They're still deciding whether or not they're going to come out.
Yeah.
Because at this point, they have so many wounds from traveling and knowing what the spectacle was all about. They've been just living in a hobbit hole, engineering these great sounds. Why go out there and expose ourselves? So it's amazing when they come out.
Don't let me down. She does. Ooh, she does. Yes, she does. And if somebody loved me like she does, ooh, she does. Yes, she does.
And, all of London gathers on the streets below, and then the police come and stop the fun. And actually, that's kind of, a perfect way for the film to end.
Yeah, there was some disappointment. I think Paul really wanted them, or George, or Ringo. They really wanted the police to grab them and physically haul them off, because that would be a better ending to the film. There's a part in it that's very sad to me, which is they're sitting in 4 chairs. And Peter Sellers comes in. Do you remember this part? Peter Sellers comes in and says, hello, fellas. 5 years before they had met Peter Sellers, and it was one of the biggest thrills of their life. And they're young and they're excited. Now it's the number of years later, and John's on heroin and they're tired.
Yeah.
And they're all sitting in 4 chairs like mannequins.
Separate.
For some reason, that segment, and I think John makes a joke about watch out for the needles on the floor. He makes a heroin joke to Peter Sellers, and it's just starting to, the milk is starting to curdle a little.
Yeah, and adding to the stress is the fact that they're now supposed to be a business. So I mentioned the Apple building in Savile Row. This is the headquarters for a groovy new company that the Beatles have set up as a kind of tax dodge. And they've set it up in a very 1960s hope that you get rid of the pigs and the man and the capitalists and just let groovy people like Magic Alex, a Greek engineer, come up with lunatic schemes and everything will be great.
He could make a studio that levitates.
Hello, I'm Alexis from Apple Electronics. I would like to say hello to all my brothers around the world and to all the girls around the world, and to all the electronic people around the world.
Apple basically, they're saying, come in and rip us off. And so loads of people do come and rip them off. And so they've got money problems as well as all the other issues that are going on. Tensions over music, tensions over drugs, tension over, their respective spouses, and now money. And money's probably the kind of the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Because Paul wants his father-in-law, so Linda's father, to run their finances for them. And the other three want a guy called Alan Klein. I mean, he seems quite a kind of New York figure, quite a New York character.
Yeah. I think thuggish is one word people might use. I think the Rolling Stones felt they had had a good experience with him. John hears about this tough guy who can come in and get you a better royalty rate. He's all down. It's actually in Get Back. John's had a meeting with him and he goes and he says to George, I think he knows me as well as you do, or better, George. I mean, can you imagine George hearing this? He's been with John since 1957, 58, and now John's had one meeting.
Yeah, well, no wonder George walks out.
I'll see you in the clubs.
Yeah.
And he walks out. They get him back in, but there's a lot of bad feeling now. And again, this is all part and parcel of Magical Mystery Tour. Hey, how hard could it be to make a movie? The Apple Boutique, how hard could it be to make a shop and sell groovy clothes? Apple Music, how hard could it be to just get rid of the obstacles and let groovy people be groovy?
Stick it to the man.
Yeah, and without accepting that maybe what made the Beatles great were hurdles and obstacles, and or added to their greatness. So there's a lot of naivete at this point.
Yeah.
It all seems kind of fun now, but I think they're pretty miserable.
So John has gone off and he's got married to Yoko in Gibraltar near Spain. He's recorded Give Peace a Chance with the Plastic Ono Band. So there's a sense there of John looking to a musical future after the Beatles.
An off-ramp.
And with Yoko, he is now very into taking kind of radical positions on Vietnam, because I think he had recorded a track called Revolution, and he'd sung two versions of it, and he said, "You can count me out, or you can count me in." And he decided to go with "You Can Count Me Out," and felt embarrassed about that. And so political activism is something that he's getting increasingly into. You can see kind of a new career direction for him with Yoko, and they've got all these money issues and arguments. And so it looks as if it's all over. But then there is one last glorious hurrah, isn't there? And we are sat here in Abbey Road.
Yeah.
I embarrassed you, but I also embarrassed myself by getting you to pose on the zebra crossing outside, which of course is the cover of the album Abbey Road.
Yeah. I only objected because I'm the last person alive to not pose. And now you made me do it.
I'm so sorry.
It's
I'm
okay.
so sorry.
It's okay.
But Abbey Road, are you a fan of Abbey Road?
Of course. Yeah. Abbey Road is fantastic. And again, I don't think Let It Be should have been the last album. And
no, it's such a downer, isn't it, compared to
and
to
look,
Abbey Road.
There's great songs on Let It Be, and Let It Be was, again, the Beatles being part of something that was really happening, which is there was music like The Band and Creedence Clearwater Revival that were stripping it all back, stripping it down, going the other way. So that's what they're doing. They're playing very stripped down.
Well, they're getting
tunes.
back, aren't they?
They're getting back, as it were. Yeah, they're getting back. And so that's great, but it's not the heroic ending they should have.
It kind of muddies the water, doesn't it? Because the songs on Get Back are recorded during the Get Back sessions, and it's then released as their final album. But actually, the last time that they're in the studio creating an album is with Abbey Road. I think the moment on Abbey Road that I find the most moving and it's sad, but it's also triumphantly moving, is You Never Give Me Your Money, which is Paul singing about, you only give me your funny papers. It's this sense, I'm bogged down in paperwork and arguments over finance and cash. And you see there the kind of the horror of the Beatles breakup.
Yeah.
And then it's such a kind of classic Paul moment where he suddenly, oh, hang this, we're off. And the kind of music soars and they're off on a kind of journey. It's a move that Paul does again and again in his songs, where you're down and then you free yourself. That for me is the moment in Abbey Road, that it's an album that is taking wing after you thought that the feathers were tarred forever.
I was lucky enough to be in the audience for the Saturday Night Live 50th, and I had seats that were way off to the side. So for all the live sketches, I had a pretty good view, but not the best. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, here comes Paul McCartney to close the show with the final track on Abbey Road. And I'm sitting right there. I'm in the perfect spot.
Her Majesty?
No, not Her Majesty. Yes, not them. Yeah. Okay, you're going to be literal.
Yeah,
but where they're trading guitar solos.
Yeah.
And I got to watch Paul McCartney do that. Yeah, out-of-body experience to see him do that, and also know that they ended on a perfect note. And I think there are people that moan about how the Beatles could have gone on into the 70s, but I think one of the things that makes them a true rarity in show business is their timing was impeccable, always. And they ended on this beautiful note and then never came back.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that we are still talking about them today. I intend to hang around show business, I already have, long after I've served my purpose to an embarrassing degree. They timed it perfectly.
Do you think also that the news that the Beatles are breaking up comes out in 1970? So in a sense, the association of the Beatles with the 1960s is absolutely cemented by the fact that they don't survive into the next decade. And do you think that's a kind of important part in framing the memory of them, the understanding of them, that they're associated so indelibly with everything that made the 60s kind of vivid and technicolor?
I brought up this concept of luck early on. None of this is planned. Think about how short a decade is to us now. At this stage of my life, a decade is so quick. They are in 1960, 61, just really getting started. And in 1969, at the end of the year, they're finishing it up. And that wasn't planned. But like so many things with them, it's what happened and it was perfect. Yes. In history books, 500 years from now, there'll be, if there's a section on the 60s and there are only 3 photographs, one of them is going to be of the Beatles.
So do you think that people will still be listening to the Beatles in 500 years?
Yeah, I do. This is with the caveat that we're all still here in 500 years. I hate to be a downer, but one never knows. Yeah.
So unless we're destroyed in a nuclear holocaust, people probably
won't. Or I'm tending more towards alien invasion. Oh, the aliens will love the music, but we won't be there anymore.
Yeah. Well,
they'll ship us off to a colony on Ryzak 7.
So this episode is spiraling off in a direction that I hadn't anticipated.
No, that's my favorite thing, is to take something... Unlike the Beatles, I like to take something that is pretty perfect and then ruin it.
No, not
with
at all.
With my mad babblings.
It's starting to go a bit Plastic Ono band.
Yeah.
Which is, so...
That can be good too.
So that is, I think, the perfect way to end this episode.
Yeah.
The 60s are over. The 70s are dawning.
Mm-hmm.
Plastic Ono band is waiting. Wings are waiting. All Things Must Pass are waiting. Photograph, Ringo's great hit, is waiting. So it's certainly not over for the constituent parts of the Beatles, but the Beatles as a band are over. And I think on that note, Conan, I should thank you very, very much for joining me here in Abbey Road to talk about the Beatles.
Well, I think I've made it clear Rest is History is my favorite podcast. So when I got the call, would you be on Rest is History at the studio where your favorite band and your obsession recorded their songs? That's a trip I had to make.
And you said that you were quite keen to be on The Rest is History, but only with one of us, because you wanted to make the other one jealous.
Well, next time it'll be just Dominic, and we'll be doing Beards of the Civil War.
Yeah.
And you will have to stew alone on your estate while we two yuck it up.
Dominic is left to reflect on the error of his ways.
Yeah.
And if only he'd been a little more enthusiastic about the Beatles, he could have been here too.
Or if he had understood anything about music.
Yeah, that's true. And on that tremendous Dominic-oriented note, thank you everyone for watching or for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.